that you would just grant us your peace that surpasses all understanding, Lord God. And Lord, we just receive your love and your grace and your mercy right now. Lord, we thank you for increasing our faith. And we thank you, Lord, for putting us in this time. And God, that you have qualified us for what you've called us for in this time. And God, we are honored to serve you. We want to glorify and honor and praise you in everything that we do. In Jesus' name, amen. So I'm just going to jump right into your daily intelligence briefing on the international front, coming to us from multiple media sources, but I'm going to read from some of our key contacts overseas. Earlier today, Russia launched at least two cruise missiles that landed in Poland, killing two. There's still more information coming out about that, but a Polish government spokesperson said, quote, "We have increased military alertness in the country, examining the possibility of activating Article 4 of the NATO alliance." Now, I'm going to describe a couple things real quick before I continue to read. Article 5 of the NATO alliance technically was triggered because a NATO member was attacked. Now, Poland is moving to Article 4, which I'll describe what that is in a second, but Article 5 is the Mutual Defense Pact of NATO. It's the critical part of NATO. Article 4 is the summoning of all members of NATO, of the alliance, and they will come together and discuss the security situation and consult on the next steps. Poland's reaction shows a couple of things. First of all, the fact they're going to Article 4 and not Article 5 means they want to try to keep things escalated. But also, secondly, there is some indication that some members of NATO might not be on board, and that they may just try to play this off as an accident. Now, I want to go to Twitter right now, and hopefully Sawyer can pull up the Twitter feed from Open Source Intelligence. We saw earlier today, actually, that Poland and Germany announced they were going to nationalize Russia's Gazprom assets in Poland and Germany. And then today, a little bit later, mysteriously, cruise missiles land in Poland. So I don't think that these two things are separate. I don't think these two things are disconnected. I think Russia is testing NATO, and so far Russia is happy with NATO's response, which is really doing nothing except consulting on what to do next. However, if this is the time that the deep state and the globalists want to go to World War III, because again, they need a world war to try to implement one world government, one world economy, one world religion, and they've used World War I to do that with the League of Nations, World War II to do that with the United Nations. Those two entities have not achieved their full aims. They need another world war to try to implement full world government and full world economy and a full one world religion. They will, if this is the time, you could use this as the situation that sparks World War III fully, or this expands beyond the borders of Ukraine. Now, the other part of this and the analysis of this, coming to us from a whole bunch of sources, Trent Palenko, and then also Fightuk's News, Euromaidan Press, and others, very clearly the Russian military has suffered a devastating loss in Kherson, which is on the west bank of the Dnipro River. The Russian Foreign Ministry announced that they would be pulling forces back, that the order had been given to pull forces back. And the problem that they faced was the Ukrainian military had their HIMARS systems within range of the crossings of the river. And so as the Russians began to try to pull back, along those choke points at the river, they were absolutely decimated from several reports by the shelling that occurred. And effectively, that Army group was cut off. So we're just getting some of the initial reports out of that. And obviously, some initial reports are overblown, but the fact of the matter is, loss in Kherson. They are now pulling back what's left of them anyway across the east side of the Dnieper River. And if you look at the map of southern Ukraine, you will see that Crimea has a little spit that juts out just underneath where the city of Kherson is. And so what happened is when the Russians pulled back, the Ukrainian artillery now is in range of all of Crimea. And so the Russians have now shut down and are evacuating one of their helicopter bases, probably already evacuated completely because of the lag time of information. But they're pulling back their helicopter base there because now Crimea is in range of Ukrainian artillery. And what that essentially means is that the Russians have lost Crimea. It's only a matter of time now. Ukrainian artillery and Ukrainian special forces are already making gains in Crimea on that little spit. In fact, there's several reports that Ukrainian special forces have already landed there and that the Russians are pulling their lines back in Crimea to the east. So this is critical. So this might be the other reason that Russia accidentally, or that two cruise missiles landed in Poland. Again, killing at least two people based on the early reports. Now, just coming in, Poland is going to invoke Article 4, and they are calling for a security consultation with the other alliance members on what to do next. So that is happening. NATO leadership is meeting right now as well. Now, I'm going to stop there and kind of jump back over to China. And Biden met with Xi Jinping down in Bali, Indonesia. Apparently, they are trying to dial back the heat between the U.S. and China. Candidly, this looks like a ruse. It looks like Chinese are just trying to buy time, and that they still are continuing to plan to invade Taiwan sooner rather than later. The Taiwanese know this. So we are, I mean, if you look at historical parallels, we are right about 1937, 1938. Biden is Neville Chamberlain, and two dictators, one in the east and one closer to the west, are trying to take advantage of this weak leadership. So right now, I mean, this is kind of an incredible development, everything that's happening right now. But we are in a very, very precarious place as a country right now, and I'm going to get into the elections here in a second. But don't, again, get caught up and take the bait of the media. Just understand the objective of, analysis of what's happening. The Russians are losing badly in Ukraine. Objectively, nobody that really has credibility is going to say otherwise, just by the objective numbers. At the very least, Russia has lost half its tank force, but closer to 85% of its entire tank armored force. Lost over 40% of its armored personnel carriers. Looks about 80,000 of its soldiers have been killed as well. So we are seeing Russia now push, like what we've been talking about the last 2 months, into a box where they're now sending a warning signal, it looks like, to NATO. And they're seeing what the NATO response is. And if the globalists want to go to war, they'll use this as a pretext to expand it to a broader war. Which brings us now to the national front here in the United States. We are looking at a system now that is fraud, or fraud is the system. It's not that we have a system, I'm talking about an election system now that is good with a little bit of corruption in it. We now have system the way it is set up. And I want to use more, I'm using the term fraud, and I want to define that, because we're beyond now election irregularities. And when we were overseas, and I was overseas for 2 elections, one in 2000 in Bosnia, and the other one in Iraq, 2004, 2005, as there was the attempt to stabilize the country. And one of the things that we looked at for elections in those countries, for legitimacy, for stabilization, was in-person voting. That was one of the number one hallmarks of a legitimate, stable election. That people would show up in person, they would present identification, and there would be no way for them to really vote twice. So you remember those purple fingers of people after they voted in Iraq, for example. So in-person voting is a critical component of legitimacy in elections. Mail-in voting, and it's known in all the election circles, is the most prone, the most potential for fraud. So we know this. The second thing that you look for in elections is the ability to audit the integrity of the election itself. Now, when I was in the legislature, I worked on this literally for years, and it would always come to this one point where we'd agree on stuff, but when we got to a place where we could do a meaningful audit on the election, that's when things started to fall apart, and there's all this resistance, particularly from the other side of the aisle. And it was over this specific issue of being able to audit the election. So I want to just give you a few ideas of what a real integral election would look like, not only here in the United States, but what we would expect overseas to lend legitimacy and stability to an election in a country. So in an election audit, there are 3, actually, and I'll get to 5 main, but I want to go 3 first. 3 main things you want to look at. Number 1 is the integrity of the voter rolls. Are people who are eligible to vote voting, and people who are not eligible to vote not voting? It's really that simple. Now, here in the United States, we could take our voter rolls, we could compare them to the postal address database. It would be really simple to figure out. I mean, we have quite literally between 2,000 and 4,000 data points on every individual in the United States for marketing purposes. We know where they are, we know where they go for shopping, we know what their interests are. But you're telling me that we couldn't clean up our voter rolls totally. And one of the issues that you don't allow, especially overseas, you don't allow same-day voter registration because you want to make sure the voter rolls have at least 30 days of integrity checks and different databases are being compared, so you don't have people voting who are ineligible to vote, and it lends integrity to the system. So when you see that we're not even doing simple things, like comparing the change of address database with the actual voter database, that raises significant problems and significant issues. And in fact, when you learn that the ERIC system, funded by George Soros, is being implemented, I think, in 30 states, well, then that really becomes a problem because you have, like we had here in Spokane, I think it was about 10 years ago, where somebody went to a house, 16 registered voters at that one house, but the house is boarded up and no one's there. Well, that raises questions. Questions that should be answered. I mean, rightfully so. Who voted? How do we know that it was them that voted and not the ballots were taken and voted by a Democrat operative? How do we know that? We don't. So these are the kind of things that surround voter integrity as far as voter rolls are concerned. That's the first thing. The second thing as far as an audit is concerned is you need to be able to audit, if you have electronic voting machines, you need to be able to audit the code of the machine. You need to be able to audit the log inside the machine. In other words, how many times has the machine been accessed and by whom or what address? Because it could be a person manually doing it or an address via the internet, MAC address or an IP address. You want to get the log inside the voting machine. If you can't audit the code of the machine, you can't audit the logs of the machine who had access to it, how can you guarantee that there has been actual, clear, fair, integral voting? You can't. The third thing that is absolutely key to having integral voting, and I don't understand why this is such a big deal, but we actually went to court over this years ago. John Ahern was running in the 6th Legislative District in downtown Spokane, and then up onto the South Hill, and there were 10,000 duplicated ballots. In other words, ballots went into the machine, they were rejected for one reason or another, and they were hand duplicated. There were 10,000 of these. So we just said something simple. We want to see the original ballot. We want to compare a hand count of the original ballot to the actual reported outcome as an audit. And even if you did only, let's say, 1,000 ballots out of 10,000, so you did 10%, it would tell you how accurate the outcome was. Well, not only did we receive pushback, but we actually went to court over this, and the judge burned or destroyed, the original ballots. And then no one could check it, and then said that the duplicated ballots were now officially the original ballots. So this kind of thing, when you don't have those top three things, the ability to audit the code, the ability to audit the logs, the ability to do just a simple audit of the original ballots versus the outcome, if we don't have this ability to check voter rolls, then the system is set up as a fraudulent system because you cannot maintain and guarantee voter integrity. Now, there's tons of reports out there. I don't want to get into all those. But what that does is it destabilizes a country. So now jumping back out to the international front, we have the Russians testing NATO, China testing our resolve, and we have internal to the country this kind of instability. And people want us now to start blaming people when we're not talking about that. We're talking about a systemic or a system failure. That is the problem right now that we're facing in this country, and we are facing a globalist plan, no doubt about it, but it's the mechanics of our elections that is the problem right now. Everything else is just a narrative. Everything else is just a narrative. I understand Jack Posobiec and Charlie Kirk, calling Lindsey Graham out for the timing of a bill, but really we need to talk about the fact that the mechanics of our elections are the issue, and that we don't even know if we'll have free and fair elections in this country again. Which brings us now to where we are, that tonight, President Trump, at about 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 Eastern, is going to make a major announcement. Many are expecting him to announce that he's running for president again. But there may be something in addition to that. So we're going to stay tuned for that. But it'll be, the announcement will be happening after the show is done. But I want to just say the fact of the matter is that President Trump was in the White House right now. Russia would not be testing NATO. China would not be testing our resolve. And I've heard a lot of people say that, we should basically back down to the Chinese dictators. Well, that's not American. And oh, by the way, China is already at war with the United States of America. That's really what's happening. China is already at war with us. They call it unrestricted warfare. It was written by two Chinese colonels. I've talked about it on the show before. But essentially every area of life is a battlefield, from pharmaceuticals and trade to manufacturing, media, and politics. And if we don't understand that we're in a war right now, they're using a Maoist insurgency model, and that political warfare is part of that insurgency model here in the United States against us, we don't even know we're at war. How can we really fight back? Which brings up the last thing that I wanted to talk about before we get to our guest today. There is I think, a fundamental forgetfulness in America. I want you to remember that back in 2017, Rich Higgins, God rest his soul, he passed away this last year. Rich Higgins, and he's been on Patriot Radio, he was on Patriot Radio, wrote a memorandum in 2017 to President Donald Trump saying this is what's coming against you. And he listed the deep state, he listed the communists, he listed the jihadis. But he also said something very interesting. He said that the establishment Republicans in America are the designated defeat mechanism to destroy this country. They're the designated defeat mechanism. And that is exactly what we're seeing right now. Mitch McConnell lost Alaska because he would rather lose, literally, he would rather lose the Senate than give up power. Kevin McCarthy, same thing. We had so many opportunities that were squandered, and now they barely have a majority because he didn't want good conservatives in office. Same thing here in Washington State. The last of the good conservatives are barely hanging on. A lot were unelected because establishment Republicans either ran candidates against them, ran whisper campaigns or undermining campaigns against them, or they literally gave money in some way, shape, or form to the opponents of good Christian constitutional conservatives. So these establishment Republicans, this isn't something oops. They literally are intentionally sabotaging those who can fight back against the communists, the jihadis, and the deep state. We need to understand this. The election day actually isn't the most important day. The most important day is the day of the leadership vote. The days after the election, when we understand what people are really going to do now that they've been put in that position of power, they've been put in that position of trust. That's the problem today, is that we have leaders in government who are intentionally targeting Christians and patriots to get them out of office. From Washington State to Washington, D.C., we see it. And I'm tired of hearing people, and not that my tiredness really matters, but it's just exasperating almost that you tell people, hey, there are leaders in the Republican Party who are intentionally sabotaging good conservative candidates, and we need a new Republican Party. We need a new, fresh, conservative, Christian, patriotic movement to arise Because right now the whole system is stacked against anyone who will try to do the right thing. And this is why so many people are frustrated, because they vote the right way, they do all right, and then we don't see results. It's because Christians particularly are being targeted. Now, we have a kingdom mindset, and a lot of what happened in this election, it's bait, to bait you into a narrative, one narrative or the other. Look, what is God doing? How is God moving? And how are we moving locally to expand his kingdom? How are we involved locally to expand his kingdom? For his glory and honor and praise. That's the question. We have a great system here in the United States of America. It is decentralized. The 10th Amendment is a key component of the Constitution. It is decentralized, and so the people are the government. We, the people, are the government of this country. We need to start acting like it, and it begins at the local level. That brings us to the last thing on the local front, and that is coming up on December 4th, we have Bill Federer, a great American patriot at On Fire Ministry, Sunday, 10 a.m., Bill Federer, December 4th, and also December 11th, Pastor Andre Shapoval is going to be here for Flame of Fire Ministries in Sacramento, California. Here in Spokane, Washington at On Fire Ministries, again, 10 a.m. on the 11th. We also have a couple things that we're working on coming up. We will tell you about those, but I want to just turn your attention also to AmFest coming up down in Phoenix, Arizona. Turning Point USA is putting that on. And I'm going to have Sawyer and Travis make sure that they put a link up to that with promo code On Fire if you want to go down there to AmFest. It's going to be a great time with constitutional, liberty-loving Christian patriots. So please check that out. And that is the briefing. Remember, the antidote to dependency and socialism is to be a God-fearing, self-reliant, freedom-loving American. Thank you to everybody that has been praying for us. And if you get a chance, go to Podbean, Spotify, Amazon, iTunes. We're on all of them, and then all of the real social media outlets. You can see the links there, and shoot us a message too. Keep in contact with us. We love your opinions. We love your ideas. And this is the way we've become truly God-fearing, self-reliant, freedom-loving Americans. All right, it's my pleasure today to introduce Tim Rivers. He's the author of the American Gulag Chronicles and founder of J6PatriotNews.com. Tim has been one of the best media sources regarding the truth on January 6th. And on his website, you can find interviews with J6 inmates. You can find out the truth of what is really going on. And he also has a site, PatriotMailProject.com, that has been a lifeline for jailed patriots since the Bundys, sending and receiving letters of love and encouragement to those political prisoners that we have right here in America. Tim, it's great to have you on Patriot Radio today. How are you doing?
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you having me on. We're doing great. We're doing great today. Yes, I can. Can you hear me? Let's see. I have a green microphone.
Can't hear me. I can't hear you if you're talking. So.
Okay. Not sure what the problem is.
All right. Well, while they get the technical details worked out there, Tim, can you hear me now? All right. Well, they get the technical details worked out with that. I'm going to go back to the international front. And I just want to, oh, by the way, actually, I'm going to bring up a couple of things I wanted to talk to Tim about on J6 and what's going on with the hearings. Interestingly, today, FBI Director Wray admitted by a non-answer. It was asked of him, were there people on January 6th dressed as Trump supporters who were really FBI agents, yes or no? And he refused to answer the question, so it appears the answer is obviously yes, raises a whole bunch of other questions. And we also found out that there were multiple federal agents that had been not only in the Proud Boys, but the vice president, apparently, of Oath Keepers was a federal asset. So, I mean, this is just being exposed. So when people use the term Fedsurrection, in other words, something that was instigated, and that people were involved there who were directly tied to the FBI, they were not far off. And so this is this is begging tons of questions right now. What happened really on January 6th? Who was a part of it? And why were they trying to smear a gigantic segment of America? Now, I've told you why here. I've told you why on the show many times, because it's Christians and patriots in America that are the last greatest obstacle to the globalists and the deep staters and the communists and the jihadis. And that's why they're afraid of us. So did we get Tim Rivers on yet? Travis, are we good or no? All right, well, I'm going to go next to Amir Sparty. I follow some of his stuff. He talked about kind of that Poland and NATO probably aren't going to do much. They're just going to talk about this. But he brings up, again, a very important point about NATO Article 5. So if Article 5 will be enacted, World War III can start. All sides are aware of it. Article 5 states that an attack on one member of NATO is an attack on all of its members. And despite its importance, NATO has only invoked Article 5 once in its history, and that was on 9/11. So probably the best summary I've seen of Article 5. Now, Article 4 of NATO, again to refresh, is the calling of all of the alliance members together to consult on a security situation and decide next steps. So Poland has invoked Article 4. NATO leaders are meeting right now, and I expect that a whole bunch of stuff is going to be happening overnight. And I just know that in the next 72 hours, we are going to have a very clear picture on whether this is going to broaden into World War III or it's going to be de-escalated and there's going to be actual peace talks between the United States and Russia. Now, there have been some reports that a U.S. delegation and a Russian delegation are meeting right now. We don't know what the subject of that is yet, but most people suspect it is in regards to the war in Ukraine. So we could see also this completely shift and peace, some sort of a peace agreement, come to that area of the world. And especially with Russia right now in danger of losing Crimea before the winter really sets in there in that area of the world, they have a lot of reasons to come to the table. And this also might be a show of force, which is why these missiles landed in Poland, might be a show of force to better their position at the negotiating table. So this is really again, a tense time, but there is a lot that can happen just in the next 72 hours. So be paying attention. And if you need to really pay attention to real-time breaking news, I put a ton of stuff up on Twitter. You can see it on my Twitter account. And also, we cross-post that. Sort does a fantastic job cross-posting that to Gab and MeWe, Getter, and the rest. But I really start with Twitter because it's easier. There's a lot more intelligence analysts on Twitter. It just makes it easier to retweet there. And if you're wondering what's going on in the next 24 hours, 72 hours, please go to my Twitter page at Rep Matt Shea, and see what has been posted. Now, I want to also mention that the losses in Kherson also are a reason that Russia is coming to the table. The losses, by some reports, are in the tens of thousands of soldiers, Russian soldiers, and in effect, rendering an entire army group completely combat ineffective. In other words, they have less than 50% strength, and they're unable to do anything, really, going forward. Now, this is in combination with the notorious maintenance records of the Russians, the notorious lack of supply or broken logistic lines of the Russian military. So you add all that together, and this is another reason the Russians are very likely coming to the table. So one last time, hey guys, were you able to get Tim up online right now, or no?
I think we're it.
Are we good now?
How are we doing? Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, Tim. Welcome to Patriot Radio. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Really appreciate everything you're doing regarding J6 and exposing the truth of what's going on in the Gulag in America. I mean, who would have thought 10 years ago this would be happening in America? But it is. Tell the listeners and catch them up a little bit on what's going on with the J6 prisoners right now.
Well, we still have almost 90 of them incarcerated across America. That's a large number of them. There's almost 900 people that were charged, or they're reaching for 1,000. I've heard people saying they're still going to keep going until they reach some magic number close to 2,000. So at the moment, we've got almost as many prisoners in Washington, D.C. as we do in Northern Neck, Virginia. And both of those sites, those jails, are basically under contract to the U.S. Marshals Service for holding prisoners pre-trial. But the problem is that most of us expect when we get arrested to go before a judge, get arraigned, and the law says 70 days for a speedy trial. Some of these folks are now approaching 650 days pre-trial in incarceration. Northern Neck is not a nice place. It is a penitentiary for violent criminals. I got a letter from one of the gentlemen. It's funny, his new roommate was actually serving a sentence there before he's got to go to serve a sentence somewhere else for murder and some very untidy things with children. And this is the kind of things that, the J6ers are being subjected to while they wait for justice. So it's not a pretty picture right now. It is not. And I think the DC environment really doesn't offer a fair and equal attempt at justice. So far, we haven't seen one good outcome that I would stand up and say justice was served. So I think this is pretty dire.
It really seems like, really, are those people a jury of their peers, and the answer is no, it really doesn't seem that way. And I'd like you to talk a little bit, it does seem dire, talk a little bit about some of the new revelations about the FBI involvement in J6. So we've been talking about this for a while. I know you've been talking about this for a while, but now it's starting to come out clearly that there were informants, agents involved in various capacities. The fact that Ray couldn't even answer the question today about whether or not an FBI agent, Brett, the Trump supporter, was there on January 6th. I think that just speaks volumes.
I don't think there's really any doubt. I have heard one of the gentlemen that I communicate with regularly, who is a decorated American hero. There's no other word for it. If you've got 3 Bronze Stars for valor, you're a hero. This gentleman has basically was standing beside Roseanne Boylan, so he was as close to the action as you can possibly get. And he has been, obviously, like many, sitting for 2 years, going through his discovery. The discovery would just destroy you and I, to be frank. We're talking, basically about 2.5 years of video if you were to sit and start watching it end to end. And you're usually given it just before your trial comes up. So you and your defense have plenty of time to understand what's going on in the videos. But in Jeff's case, he's been going through the discovery, and he calls out names and points out instances and calls out the Axon camera number, the exact timestamp. This guy, look, he's not supposed to be here. This guy's got a gun under his clothing. There is no doubt that there were agents within the crowd working either with concert or perhaps out of concert, considering the consequences of what happened that day, that turned into basically being at the front line. Some people believe they were the agitators that set it off in a choreographed manner. And I've seen some videos that not just Reyes, but other people in the crowd that are very hard to explain, and also videos within the Capitol itself. So in my opinion, I think there were actors. I was not there that day. I can't, give you first person testimony, but I can tell you that the people that write to me and the prisoners that I interview are all pretty much convinced that was a complete setup that day, that there were actors in the crowd that fomented problems, not just the Capitol Police and Metro Police, but agents provocateur. And I think the FBI's reluctance to come forwards, their recent exposure in the Whitmer case, and now, with the vice president of the Oath Keepers, I believe that the complicity goes beyond just attempting to enforce the law, but now begins to try to influence the law and create crime. And perhaps that's what happened on January 6th. I'm not sure. I guess everyone must ask themselves in their heart if they believe their government capable of that, if they believe the premier law enforcement agency of the United States was complicit in that, and do they believe that the truth has come out? And I guess everybody's got to ask themselves that question. And some of us may come to different answers.
Well, and I think also our elected representatives need to be asking those exact questions in even more forceful ways when they have that opportunity. No question about that.
I think we're very disappointed in the response that we have seen from the legislature, with the exception of 2 or 3 outstanding individuals who really have stood up and voiced their and attempted to get the truth out and to get access to these prisoners so that they could tell their story. And that's probably where I come in. Telling the story is hard when you're being censored, when all your mail is being read, when you're not allowed visitation with your family, when you don't have video visitation, even not forget personal visitation, when you're subjected to 2 weeks of lockdown quarantine in a solitary cell every time you have a visit with your attorney or you speak to somebody in person. So the J6 prisoners are some of the most censored individuals in America today. And the only way they've been able to get their messages out is through letters to supporters. And I think you mentioned the Patriot Mail Project, patriotmailproject.com, is the way that people have been able to find prisoners and communicate with them, to give them support, to tell them how we feel about them, that we don't buy what the mainstream media tells them. And the letters we get back from them are not only heartbreaking, but they are revealing. The messages I'm telling you from Jeff McCullough, they're in his letters. And we began to get so many letters that folks began sending them into us at J6 Patriot News to post. And we thought that was a very important thing for America to hear, is to hear firsthand their experience that day, what they saw, what they suspect, and more importantly, how they are being treated as citizens as they await justice. And the letters began to accumulate to the point where we had to do something with them to get past the censorship. And that's where this new book comes in.
Well, Tim, I want to just say that I don't know, you probably don't know my family's experience, but my wife's lived in the former Soviet Union. My father-in-law's best friend, Leonid Svetlov, was in the Gulag with Alexander Solzhenitsyn. My sister-in-law was broken out of a prison camp twice in the former Soviet Union. And I talked to them about what's happening in America. And they say this is exactly what happened to us. I mean, they're active. I mean, they are involved right now. They're asking us how to be involved. A lot of these people in this community, I'm just using kind of the broader community now, that experienced the former Soviet Union, they see the writing on the walls here in America. And I just, if you could for a moment, tell the listeners not only about the urgency, but I think it's important to tell the story of the actual conditions that these prisoners are living in, some of the things that they've endured, And then again, let's get back to how we can also help them out here at the end. So if you could go through just kind of a call to action, and then also, the conditions these guys are living in. And I mean, I don't want to steal any thunder, but it should break.
It's horrific. Yeah, it is horrific. In the DC Gulag is probably, we'll start at the beginning. The pod that these individuals are being held in was a former mental health facility, and it was closed because of the inadequacy of the infrastructure to support prisoners. The water was bad, the air systems were bad, everything was basically out of age and out of operation. But this is where they decided to put the majority of the January 6 prisoners as they were rounded up across the country and placed into the facility that was hurriedly brought online. The stories that you get in the letters, it's really hard for it to come through for me to just speak about it. If you read it in their own handwriting, you'll be horrified. But the water is black that comes out of the faucets that they have to drink from. The vents blow black mold and a constant rain upon their bed, their clothing, and on them. The walls are covered with, well, it's pretty unspeakable, but I will just let your listeners imagine what the wall of a prison that has been not cleaned and not cared for in years and was abandoned and then rehoused, what it might look like inside. It's pretty gross. The food is all carbs and sugars. Most of the folks in there are now having to go to medical because of diabetic type symptoms. And actually the medics will tell them right up front, you're going to probably need a little medication while you're here because of the quality of the food. And so you might develop a few symptoms. So this is horrific. You're intentionally driving people into nutritional disaster. The abuse from the guards is probably the worst. The prison system, especially I think in the private sector, the private prison system, which Northern Neck and Rappahannock and the individual places that the marshals are storing these folks across the country are basically private institutions that are paid by contract, and they do everything on low bid. The quality of the food, the quality of the care, the quality of the guards and the protective inmates in there is very bad. They're constantly under threat of injury or even death. Ryan Sansol was beaten so severely he lost an eye. Chris fell in a thing and would not receive medical attention for literally months. We've had people in there with cancer that are not getting treatment, basically being denied care, but mostly mentally abused almost every single day. The most strident, racist guards are allowed into the pod to try and provoke them on a daily basis into acting out so they can be punished, sent to solitary, denied their privileges, what few privileges they have. Most shockingly, they are denied religious services, access to a minister or a priest. They're not allowed access to the libraries. Many of them had no Bibles and had to have them sent in, and sometimes they were interdicted before they reached them. And so the prisoners began to basically form their own Bible study groups and hold their own services, acting as pastors to each other to try and bring themselves some comfort and some solidarity in their faith. And they constantly receive abuse for that as well. It's pretty horrific. I can't imagine that that you or I or any normal American citizen would see this abuse as acceptable while awaiting justice, not while receiving justice or being punished, but while awaiting justice. They are in bad shape. Some of them, I believe we're at 6 suicides now. And these are not the men in prison. These are the people who have been released, who have been harassed by the Department of Justice and the FBI to the point where they have given up all hope and taken their lives. That our government would behave this way and treat American patriots who acted constitutionally that day, regardless of what you think happened on January 6th or whether they are guilty of a crime or not. They are citizens who are guaranteed what it says at the overhead of the Supreme Court: fair and equal justice under the law. and they are not receiving that. Their conditions are horrific. You can read, unfortunately, the book that we've created, the American Gulag Chronicles, Letters from Prison, is a chronological catalog of this horror. In their own words, in their own hands, you will read their letters. You will see the letters and the imagery, so you can see their own handwriting and how they write it. And you will participate in an exchange of great sorrow, great faith, and great strength if you read these letters. And if you join me with the PatriotMailProject.com in writing and succoring these American patriots as they suffer at the hands of what is clearly an unholy alliance in this country. The book is going, you can find the book, by the way, at j6patriotnews.com. You can pre-order this book, which will be printing. The first run print will be here in November. And the proceeds from this book are meant to do exactly what we're talking about doing, which is to save these men and women, to protect their families who have lost their breadwinners, their homes, their cars. In some cases, the family has been separated with children living with relatives because they've lost everything. All the proceeds from this book, and I mean all of the proceeds from this book, minus the printing and shipping, will go into the J6 Fund for American Gulag Chronicles, which is a nonprofit organization made up of a board of January 6th leadership, who will determine how the money is used immediately to save those in the most jeopardy and to support families so that they're not left behind in this horror, because they are as much victims as the gentlemen and ladies who are standing in prison today. So my call to action is do something, folks. These are your neighbors. These are the folks you go to church with. These are the people you might have played golf with. This is the fellow who might have written you a ticket because he's a police officer, or the gentleman who might have saved your home because he's a fireman. These are American patriots who believe they acted constitutionally on January 6th to save their republic, and they are being tortured. And we ask you to please intervene. Write your congressman, write your representatives. Ring the phone at the U.S. Marshals Service. You'll find their telephone numbers listed on our websites. Get involved somehow in this fight to save our country and to save these brave patriots. And I guarantee you, if you read these letters, and you can find many of them and the interviews on our website, your attitude about this fight will be changed forever. And so I thank you so much for getting involved and for listening to these people's pleas for help and hopefully acting on it too. There, nothing worse than dead air, is there, boss? So, again, j6patriotnews.com. You can pre-order the book there. And I urge you to go to the PatriotMailProject.com and help our prisoners stay connected to the Patriot family. And remember that they have children and wives who are left behind. And there is a Christmas project that we held last year and will be held again this year to help those families and make sure that they have a good holiday. Even though they're separated from their loved ones, we want to make sure they have a blessed holiday as well. And so you can join our Christmas project there and help support a J6er family through the holidays. How are we doing, Matt? You back?
Jim, you still there?
I'm still here, partner.
Hey, sorry about that. It dropped. Anyway, I just want to thank you for coming on right now, and I want to thank you for everything you're doing. I just, when I was hearing that you tell those descriptions of what was happening to these guys in prison, it literally sounded like the stories from the Gulag in the former Soviet Union about how they formed their own Bible studies, became their own pastors, encouraged each other. Some people couldn't take it, unfortunately, and took their own lives. I mean, it sounded exactly like that. And I just appreciate your heart that this cannot happen in America. And while we still have breath, we're going to be speaking out, supporting those guys that are in prison, and we're going to be looking and pursuing justice in every possible way we can. So thank you for joining me on Patriot Radio today, Tim, and God bless you, and I look forward to working with you guys in the future and getting out whatever information you need us to get out.
Thank you for having us on, and God bless our country.
God bless. All right, Tim Rivers, he is, and check this out, too, J6 Patriot News, j6patriotnews.com, j6patriotnews.com for the latest updates on what's going on. You can find out about some of the latest information that happened, like, for example, today, and we don't have to take this. We don't have to sit back. And I wanted to ask Tim, we just didn't have the chance to, is, anytime that somebody does this and stands up for truth, when I broke the story on the Larry Wooten memo with the Bundys, he needs prayer. I needed prayer then, he needs prayer. And so find time to pray for him. This is Matt Shea. Thanks for joining me on Patriot Radio today. God bless all of you. And he is making this generation the greatest one. Keep up the fight.